Have you ever wondered why people seem to talk about Ace-5 suited as if it's a magic hand that we should always play aggressively? Or perhaps you've heard players or commentators refer to it as the solver hand. If you have, this video is for you. Hi Wizards, I'm Matt Hunt, and it's time to figure out why the solver likes Ace-5 suited so much. Let's start with the basics and talk about the properties of the hand itself. The best way to look at Ace-5 suited is that it's one of very few hands in the deck which possess the properties of multiple different hand classes at the same time. In fact, it may be the only one. First, it has connectivity. While it might not have the ability to flop an open-ended straight draw in the way that 7-6 suited or 6-5 suited can, it has a different property instead. It can't flop the bottom end of the straight. If we have 7-6 suited, a flop of 10-9-8 is somewhat awkward because we're drawing dead against Queen-Jack, and we're not blocking that hand either. Plus, even if we happen to have a backdoor flush draw as a backup, we can sometimes run into a better backdoor draw. The same goes for a hand like 6-5 on a flop like 9-8-7. We lose to Jack-10 and we're not blocking it. But when we have Ace-5 suited and the flop is 4-3 deuce, we're only worried about 6-5 suited, and we're already blocking one combo of it, which makes it much easier to be content playing a huge pot. And if we flop a backdoor flush draw, it's guaranteed to be the nut backdoor. We should also note that this property of rarely running into dominating straights also exists with Ace-4 suited and Ace-3 suited, but not with Ace-Deuce suited, since Ace-Deuce can lose to 7-6 on a flop of 5-4-3. This is partly why Ace-Deuce suited is often a little worse pre-flop than the other wheel-suited aces. Another part of this is because having a deuce in our hand is generally unfavorable pre-flop, since it will be blocking a lot of the weakest hands left to act behind us. Plus, of course, we have to consider the basic reality that having a 5 kicker is better than having a deuce kicker. And of course, on top of all this, we can just flop a straight flush, or a straight with the nut flush draw, both of which are extremely powerful hands with nearly 100% equity, and will exist on flops where our opponent can have a lot of hands which might be willing to play a big pot. Now, we've already mentioned the value of making the nut backdoor draw, but of course, since our hand is suited, we also have to consider the value of making the nut front door flush draw as well. In particular, of flopping the nut flush draw and being able to unblock all of our opponent's weaker flush draws. This maximizes the frequency that we get to win with the nut flush over the second nut flush, and increases the likelihood of winning huge pots in this exact way. Plus, naturally, we can just flop the nuts when we flop a flush, and hopefully be up against a hand like top pair with the king high flush draw, which is drawing virtually stone dead. And we can also flop something like bottom pair plus the nut flush draw, or bottom pair plus the nut backdoor, both of which will be spots where we have the option to play aggressively. Similarly, we can also flop top pair and the nut flush draw on an ace high board, in a situation where if our opponent has a flush draw and plays it aggressively, they're drawing basically dead against our hand. However, in addition to both of these properties, which are also shared by many other hands to varying degrees, Ace-5 suited has one more crucial thing working in its favor: the simple fact that it contains an ace. This is favorable for a few reasons. First, unlike other suited connector hands, it can win with one pair a lot more frequently simply by making top pair. In fact, it doesn't even have to make a pair to win. Sometimes we might find ourselves playing a big pot with the nut flush draw, missing the river and giving up, only to end up winning the pot anyway against a worse flush draw that also gave up. Secondly, having an ace means we block the top of all of our opponent's pre-flop ranges in any spot. When we open raise, we're less likely to get 3-bet. When we 3-bet, we're less likely to get 4-bet, and so on. This is extremely powerful in pre-flop spots. Finally, in post-flop spots, we're guaranteed to have at least 3 outs to make top pair on any board, as well as quite often having a blocker to our opponent's ability to flop top pair, top kicker. This significantly increases our capacity to play aggressively post-flop in a lot of spots, especially across multiple streets. Not only does Ace-5 suited contain an ace, but like all of the other wheel aces, it also has a low card kicker, which means our kicker is less likely to be interfering with our opponent's range or blocking any of their potential bluffs, especially when we're facing a pre-flop 3-bet. It's essentially the best example of what you might see referred to as the blocker-unblocker concept, which you can read about in a recent GTO Wizard article by my colleague Barry Carter. When we combine these properties, which of course are also shared by any hand containing an ace, with the suitedness and connectedness we mentioned earlier, it makes Ace-5 suited an extremely powerful and versatile hand. In fact, if I were to sum up in one word why the solver likes Ace-5 suited so much, that would be the word: versatility. Because of the simple reality that an ace can be either high or low in no limit hold'em, Ace-5 suited is almost unique in its capacity to achieve multiple strategic goals depending on the situation. It's effectively a suited connector which can also make top pair, or a high card, low card, blocker, unblocker hand which can also make straights and flushes. So with all of this in mind, let's look at a few examples of spots in which Ace-5 suited is extremely powerful and explore how it became known as the solver hand. First, we'll take a look at a super deep stacked spot for a 300 big blind cash game scenario with a time rake or no rake structure, so we're using our basic chip EV ranges here. In this spot, we're the under the gun player at an 8-handed table, so we're under the gun 8, and we're using a 3 big blind open size. We can see that Ace-5 suited is right there in our opening range, and that's not particularly remarkable, but what is interesting is if we consider the actual EV of various hands here in this spot. My question for you is this. Which of these 4 hands has exactly the same EV as Ace-5 suited here, if we're open raising in this spot? Is it Ace-Queen off, King-10 suited, Pocket 8s, or 6-5 suited? Take a moment to think about your answer. Well, the answer is actually King-10 suited, so good job if you got that one right. But here's the really interesting thing. All the other hands listed there are doing substantially worse than Ace-5 suited. If we take a look at the EVs themselves for the raising hands here, Ace-5 suited is making 0.09 big blinds, which is the equivalent of 9 big blinds per 100 hands, which is a fairly solid win rate. King-10 suited is, as we said, exactly the same, but Ace-Queen off is only making 0.01 big blinds, so 1 big blind per 100. Ace-5 suited is making 9 times as much EV as Ace-Queen off here. If we look at Pocket 8s and 6-5 suited, both of those hands are making exactly 0 EV. They're breaking even, which means they're mostly added to our range as a mix in this spot due to the need for board coverage across as many textures as possible. In fact, even Pocket 9s or Queen-Jack suited are only making 0.1 big blind here, or 10 big blinds per 100. Meaning Ace-5 suited is roughly equivalent in value to each of those 2 hands in this spot. I imagine if you ask the vast majority of players, they would assume that the value of 9s or Queen-Jack suited at deep stacks here would be much greater than Ace-5 suited, but it really isn't. Now let's flip around to look at what happens for the player on the button here responding to the under the gun 8 open raise. We can see that Ace-5 suited is mixing between 3 bets and calls here, and never folding, but again, let's take a look at the EVs. Ace-5 suited is making 0.16 big blinds, or 16 big blinds per 100, with either option here, which is more than any pocket pair from Pocket 7s downward. And it's also more than any other suited ace without a Broadway card as a kicker. Clearly, the in-position player on the button here benefits a lot from all the various properties that Ace-5 suited possesses. The real magic of Ace-5 suited, though, and one of the reasons why it often plays so aggressively, comes when we look at the under-the-gun 8 player's response against a 3-bet from the button. Ace-5 suited is actually 4-betting at a high frequency here, roughly 70% of the time, which is more than any other hand in this range except for Pocket Aces. Ace-5 suited is actually the second most common 4-betting hand in this player's range. Why would this be the case? Well, it all comes down to the blocker-unblocker phenomenon, and we can see that if we look at the button player's response against the 4-bet. If we highlight the range of hands which the button is folding to the 4-bet, we can see 2 things. First of all, some of the hands which are folding are actually Ace-X hands which dominate Ace-5 suited, which is very nice. Everything in this region here, and also Ace-King off in addition to that. And this is very helpful because it means we can fold out better hands by 4-betting. But most importantly, a big chunk of the range which is folding to the 4-bet contains 2 cards between a king and an 8 or a 7. You can see everything in this region right here. And that's going to mean that we're unblocking all of those hands with Ace-5 suited. And if we, on top of that, look at the range which is actually 5-betting, so I highlight the 5 bets here, we can see something really interesting. It's very clear very immediately. Every single hand has an ace in it. Other than the fact that they're 5-betting pocket kings exactly once in every 1,000 times that they have it here, every hand that's 5-betting has at least 1 ace in it. This means that the efficiency of 4-bet bluffing with Ace-5 suited here is really maximized in 2 ways. we're unblocking most of the 3-bet fold hands, and we're blocking all the 5-bet hands. Finally, there's one other interesting bonus here. Take a look at the hands which call the 4-bet. In particular, take a look at 6-5 suited and 5-4 suited. They're flatting this 4-bet sometimes here, because the button needs to have some board coverage in their flatting range. This means that not only can we block the 5-betting hands and unblock the folding hands, but we actually sometimes get value from being called by hands we're dominating. When the flop comes ace-6-5 or 5-5 deuce, we can potentially win a huge pot, and our overall equity is slightly better against the button's entire continuing range as a result. This is another small factor that contributes to ace-5 suited being so powerful here. Now that we've looked at a deep stacked spot, let's take a brief look at a shallower stacked tournament spot to see why ace-5 suited likes to play so aggressively in those scenarios. Here we're playing with 40 big blind symmetric stacks and chip EV ranges, so we're not factoring in ICM, and it's the button versus small blind formation. We're obviously opening ace-5 suited every single time here on the button, and then the small blind is 3-betting fairly wide here about 13% of the time. When it gets back around to us on the button, ace-5 suited is actually 4-bet 100% of the time here. We're 4-bet jamming every single time with ace-5 suited. Why would that be the case? Well, once again, it comes down to the blocker-unblocker effect. If we look at the small blind's call-off range versus the button's jam, a lot of it is ace-10 plus, ace-10 suited up to ace-king suited, and then also ace-10 off through ace-king off at a pretty decent frequency as well. And of course, we're blocking these hands with ace-5 suited. And in particular, we're also unblocking all of these offsuit Broadway hands, which are pretty high-frequency 3-bet folds in this formation, as well as unblocking some of these middling suited hands on top of that. One other important factor here is that while jamming ace-5 suited is making an entire big blind of EV here on its own as a jam, so it's good for that reason first of all, it's also helpful for the rest of our range. Having hands like ace-5 suited in our 4-bet jamming range forces our opponent to start calling off with middling pocket pairs like 6s through 9s, and strong but not nutted ace-x hands like those ace-jacks and ace-10s that we saw. While we would obviously prefer our opponent to fold those hands if we have exactly ace-5 suited, from the perspective of our range, it's really good that we're forcing them to call off there, because now we're able to get much more value every time we 4-bet jam with hands like queens through 9s, ace-queen, or ace-king. And you can see that reflected in the fact that a hand like 8s is now making almost 3 big blinds, 9s 4 big blinds, 10s almost 7, jacks more than 9 bigs, and even hands like ace-queen off and ace-jack off are doing really, really well here in terms of profit. It's always important to think about what a specific hand can do for our overall range, rather than purely about the incentives of the hand itself. If we're only 4-bet jamming strong hands, then it's a lot harder for the very top of our range to get more value, but if we're 4-bet jamming too many weak hands, then those hands are no longer getting enough folds. Ace-5 suited is right in that zone where it has the right properties to 4-bet jam every time here without worrying too much about getting called, because it does have plenty of equity against most of the calling range, and it gets a lot of folds in the first place. So that's about it for this video. Hopefully you now have a solid grasp of why ace-5 suited is such a powerful hand. If you want to explore some other individual hand combos, you can take a look at this video about how to play ace-king in MTTs. I hope you liked the content, and I'll be back soon with more videos for you. Good luck, Wizards.